Now, is there any other business? The first thing I would like to do would be to ask Susan Dowling to give an update on the campaign for justice for polio survivors. So could Susan have the microphone, please?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairperson, and good afternoon, everybody. Just to recap, we began the Justice for Polio Survivors campaign back in 2018, following the Rehab/Polio Fellowship of Ireland's withdrawal of funding to provide services and supports to people with disabilities arising from polio. We asked for those funds to be reinstated, but our request was refused. So what we were asking was for an independent person to make a decision about this, and we would agree to abide by that decision. But again, that request was refused by Rehab. So due to the COVID-19 restrictions, we were unable to organise further protests in relation to getting the funding reinstated, but we have been active behind the scenes. I want you all to know that, especially people that were so good to come out and support us with the protests. So we made approaches in the last few years to TDs, senators, party spokespersons, ministers. We made presentations to 2 Oireachtas committees. We were in touch with the Ombudsman. We spoke to the former Minister for People with Disabilities, Finian McGrath, who was the only person who was willing to take up our cause. Unfortunately, he retired and Anne Rabbitt took over that position, and we have been in touch with her. She did initially appear to be supportive, but then backtracked and suggested that the right way to deal with this situation was to make our case to the charity regulator. That was not without risk, because any decision by the charity regulator that is not in our favour really means the end of the campaign. And so before we took it any further, we decided it was prudent to seek legal advice. And we've been fortunate to engage with a firm of solicitors in Dublin on a pro bono basis. And they have in turn sought advice from a barrister who has made a number of recommendations as to how we should proceed with the case, also free of charge. And the intention is therefore to make the case as good as we possibly can for ourselves by the way that we present it. And the solicitors will be doing that on our behalf, which is absolutely fantastic. So we need your help to provide evidence for this campaign. So we have already underway a list of campaign supporters, and we would appreciate, if you haven't already done so, if you would sign up, because the more numbers we have, the better our case. So we have out on the table outside, we have a list that you can come along and sign and provide your contact details. We also require evidence for the solicitor making the case to the charity regulator regarding the fundraising that any of you may have done in the past, probably in the 60s and 70s, specifically to do with the purchase and upkeep of PFI's property Park House in Dublin. We know that many people with polio and their families were involved in these fundraising activities during those years. Knowing about your experience would be very useful. So please, can you visit the table outside, and we could take details of you for contact, and we will be in touch with you again at another time when we specifically know what we would like you to do. So these leaflets are on the tables. There are also some outside on our table where you can read what I've just said, a summary of an update on the campaign, and we'd very much like you to come and pay us a visit. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Susan. And on behalf of everybody in the room, I wish to say a warm thanks for the absolute steadfastness and persistence that your group have taken over these years on this long, hard struggle for justice for polio survivors. Without the dedication of your team, none of this would be happening, and really, I'm in awe of you. Anybody who would like to discuss the matter further with Susan, Susan will be available, as she said, outside to answer your questions. Thank you. Now, we have a question from one of the Zoom members. Can polio be sought on long-term illness card? And I'll ask Fran to answer that question for us.
Yeah, I know that's been a sore subject for a lot of members. The problem is that the scheme hasn't been reviewed or updated in about 50 years. And successive ministers of health have made it very clear that they have no intention of ever reviewing it again, other than to completely finish the scheme. I think that their aspiration of the government would appear to be to actually create a situation where the card is unnecessary because the benefits of the card would be universal. But the problem is, in the meantime, we have an anomaly where people with the card have benefits that other people don't have, and so it is a problem. So I think what we're going to do, and as you heard earlier, we now have an advocacy officer, is that one of the things we'll be looking at to see, can we secure the benefits of having the card for everyone, irrespective of the card? In other words, that our members would be entitled to all the benefits of the card, even if they don't actually have the card, because it's the benefits that accrue to people that are the important thing, not so much the card in itself. And there's also a major issue with a significant percentage of our members not having medical cards either. And that's also an issue that our new advocacy officer will be looking at, and we would seek to address in the years ahead.
Thank you, Fran. So now I would like to call on John Dolan to give us a reflection on 30 years. John is the CEO of the Disability Federation of Ireland and a fellow polio survivor, well known to many of you, and we look forward to his reflections on the organisation over the years.
It's lovely to be here. I'm with my tribe. I go to lots of meetings with a whole range of disability organisations in my work, but this is the only one where I truly belong, in the sense that I'm a polio survivor myself, and it's lovely to meet so many people here today that I know going back 40 and more years, colleagues that work with me in the Irish Wheelchair Association that I know from back then, and obviously some people still around that I have met through involvement with this organisation itself. For polio survivors, by polio survivors, 6 words. There's so much energy and honesty and power in those few words. You are working out of your own gut, out of your own understanding of the day-to-day issues, and out of your love and affection and your regard for people you've known all your life, many of you in hospital, in institutions, and growing up and going through the same struggles that they have gone through, and knowing without having to speak and to say it, what it is actually like to grow up and live with a condition that, if you like, comes back and takes a second bite with the post-polio syndrome. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here for all of those reasons. I've been asked to reflect on the past 30 years. So at one level, it's a trip down memory lane, but there's more than nostalgia involved here. I'm going to try and maybe help us all to remember, not just to remember. Because as we get older, you look back and you can see things with greater insight. And maybe it's just as well as youngsters, we didn't have the insight that we can bring as older people, because some of that insight is tricky and difficult. And it's also an occasion to identify, I hope, or maybe challenge ourselves to see patterns over the decades that we didn't see as we lived through it. I'm amazed after the 2 years of COVID that I've kind of forgotten what it was like the first 6 months, the second 6 months, into the next year or whatever. You actually need a historian or someone to come back in 10 years' time and actually lay it out in front of you. Like, this is what it was like when Leo went on the television from, was it Washington or New York, and said, go home and stay there. Everything is closing down. So, you know, that element of it, and then we hope there'll be a vaccine. So it's the same thing here, that it's an opportunity to try and relook. Of course, I'll focus on the 30 years, but I want to go back beyond the 30 years, and I want to invite us to think about the next 30 years. I have to pay tribute, I think, he's not in the room now, but to Fran, for this. Fran is your chief executive, but he's the current chairperson, has been for the last 3 years of the Disability Federation of Ireland. I want to certainly thank him very sincerely for the work and effort and commitment he has put into that. And I can also say to you that he is a very strong and effective advocate in terms of the issues for your own organisation and sharing that with colleagues across DFI and working on various committees that help that. I also, my thanks to your Cathaoirleach, Macrina Clancy, and in particular, I want to acknowledge her involvement in the European Parliament of People with Disabilities recently, and which DFI organised for the Irish delegation, and Macrina was a critical part of that, and she was actually then going straight from Brussels to somewhere in Paris, no, not in Paris, somewhere in France, through Paris, and talking about the mobility card in the EU. Both yourself and another member of our delegation had, particularly Caroline, had a fairly horrendous experience in terms of the air travel and whatever. So they're practical expressions of real European-wide issues that are local issues. They're not European out there. They're real issues for people who want to travel for whatever reason. I was looking back and thinking to my first involvement with what was then called the Post-Polio Support Group, and its initial committee. Jim Costello, lovely to see Delia here, absolutely, and her colourful niece, or Jim's colourful niece, Niamh, and Fran has come back now after I have complimented him, typical. But and Jim was part of that first group, and I'll come back to Jim in a little while, but I want to mention two people in particular, clearly Joan Bradley, and also Rosalind Gallagher. It was men who go swimming get annoyed with women who stand in the swimming pool and talk, right? But these two will be forever forgiven, because what did they talk about? They talked about the need to have a group such as this. And you know what? Being in the swimming pool was probably the most relaxing, well, was, for folk like ourselves to actually easily discuss something so important. Rosalind was on that, one of the early committee. Jim was, I was asked to join it a couple of years later, Vera Roach, of course, Kieran Nicholson, someone else who's passed away at a very early age, and Father Paddy Lewis, of course. So they're people I remember working with a bit at that time. The other thing I have to say about Joan is she was my substitute mother. My mother passed away in the late 90s, and but every time Joan would see me, she'd be coming to our, on behalf of the polio organisation, she'd be coming to the meetings in DFI, and the minute she'd see me, she'd give me that look, and she said, "John, are you looking after yourself? I don't like the way you're walking." And the only difference between her and my mother was that when I'd go home, that same script would be followed by, "You need to get your hair cut." Yeah, so Joan didn't go into that territory, but it was the love of somebody, and that wasn't because I was a favourite of her. She was like that with everybody, wasn't she? Her depth, her love, and her care for people. And I'll take it beyond Joan, because that's a reflection I have about this organisation and the people in it. Your ordinary affection and care and concern about other people. I know what I'm talking about here, because I go to meetings of lots of organisations. It's not that none of them care about others. Absolutely they do. But you have it in some very special way here, and that is a core reflection that I have at this time. I've lived with polio, that's one part of my life. I'm a member of Polio Survivors Ireland since it started, was on the board for a little while. And through DFI, I have a lot of connections with it, obviously. So 1993 was the start of your organisation. But what your organisation was about, I first came to hear about it in early 1980, out in Clontarf in Blackheath, when a very mild-mannered man who was the chief executive then, Phil O'Meara. I was only 23, 24, and I had just started there. And he said to me, he was the first person who mentioned to me a thing called post-polio syndrome, or the late effects. And it was Paddy Lewis who had mentioned it to him, because Paddy worked he was a priest in California, and yeah. So here's the reflection. It wasn't from the polio organisation I heard it. And I think at that stage, the Polio Fellowship had run out of puff, well and truly at that stage. So That's not me slagging, that's me saying that our organizations can lose their edge. So the importance of keeping your edge, keeping ahead of things. If people in Ireland knew about the syndrome, and if the people in this room and those who have passed now knew about the syndrome in 1980 and had a group that could do something about it, it would be more than a decade ahead of when you took up the struggle in 93. That's the point I'm making. So there was a real need for people. Now, one of the things I suppose that changed between the first iteration, the Polio Fellowship, and an organization starting, 40, 50 years later, was you now had adults who had lived with, it couldn't be adults who had lived with polio in 1949 or 1951. It was set up by adults to try and deal with it, and it would be parents and friends as much as anything else. But you were actually the people who were living with the problems and had your contacts and whatever. So there was that fatigue that had, if you like, wasted the Polio Fellowship. And there was also, I suppose, that sense that the polio thing is over. It's not over for the people who keep living with it, but it's like COVID isn't over for people who still live with it. But the virus has been put under control. So I think that's very important for this organizations to reflect on it at this time. Another point that I'd just like to make is that, if you like, polio is also something that goes beyond polio. It was a virus that struck deep and hard and killed people and left its mark. And if that wasn't enough, as I said already, and as you all know, it came back again in a different manifestation. There's the trauma of growing up with it. And whether we wish to speak about it, and that's our own business, we've all had to manage those quiet nights on our own, trying to make sense of it. That's an experience for any youngster that has to deal with any condition. And it's an experience for any family. So you also have something that's sort of unpleasantly universal, an experience of trauma and trying to deal with it. I want to go back to Rosalind Gallagher for a minute. We were truly, all of us, shocked when Rosalind passed away. She was still a young, very active woman. I think maybe she had just retired, Anne, had she? Yeah, but she went a few years early. And my abiding memory of Rosalind is one day in Dolan shopping centre, I was doing shopping, I saw her coming against me in the wheelchair, and she had a little young one, little girl with her about 13, 14, who was living in the hospital in Baldoyle. And Rosalind was her mammy, her mentor. And Rosalind, anyone that knew her, she sat up straight, she had magnificent posture. She wore always trousers, and the crease in it, right down the middle of the knee. She was impeccable. And she used to go out to the hospital, and she was pally with this little one, but she was bringing her to Dolan shopping centre, and it was upstairs to Dunn's, which is not the grocery side of Dunn's, it's the clothes and all the gear and all the rest of it. And it's that idea of people of an older age who are mentors of younger people and clearly that little girl didn't have polio, but Rosalind knew where she was and what she needed and her self-esteem, and to give her a bit of confidence and oomph. And I think that's an important part of a role that you can play. You might want to think about the similarities in some ways between the virus that COVID was and is and the polio virus, in the sense of what might linger after it. I'll say no more about that. I want to talk for a minute before I close up about Jim Costello. And I wasn't long in DFI when I realized that today Jim Costello would ring me. Tomorrow he'd ring someone else on the staff, and the next day he'd ring someone else. And he had us all pestered and mitered. And we had to figure out a way to put some schmott on this that we can't deal. We didn't know where we were. So, but that was Jim, his commitment and energy to moving this stuff on for yourselves was unstoppable. And I don't know whether it was around that time, maybe it was a little bit later. I copped when I was in conversations with him. I could hear this, I can't describe it now, but it was the noise from the sound of the iron lung. And you quickly realized that when Jim was in the iron lung, you need to kind of set yourself down because he's nowhere, has his list, and you have to go through all of it with him. Yeah. And that's a story, if you like, about the discipline, the planning, and the dedication of someone. But it's also a story about people with polio who have to plan, who have to think in relation to access, in relation to energy, you know, all of those things. So it's also a way, it's a lovely story to remember, but it's also a way of remembering what is the day-to-day experience of people. I was trying to find Pat Inglesby's poem this morning, and of course I couldn't find the book. And I'm a polio survivor that isn't organised. That's what that means. But you know that poem when he describes almost polio as a being or somebody that's coming down such a street, turns the corner right, passes Johnny O'Sullivan's house. Why didn't he go in there? Why had he to come into my house? Why had it to come into my house? And why did it have to pick me instead of my brother, or whatever it was? And there's an awful lot going on in that poem, other than kind of it being humorous on the surface, yeah. But there are some of that's the human side of living with a condition. It's a good occasion for me, and I'll finish with this. My own parents were yin and yang. My father used to call me Jack. That was what he called me. And when I'd fall, and no surprise, I did that a lot, because you never realized you're supposed to be careful when you're a child, and you just go at things, and your knees tell the history of it afterwards. But he'd be totally unpanicked, unflustered, and I'd be in bits, obviously. And he would put his hand down, just down and out, like that. And he'd say, Jack, once down is no defeat. Over and over, that was said as I was a child. That was, if you like, what we call it, man-to-man or something like that. My mother, of course, was a different basket of emotion. And she was always emphasizing, oh, John, we have to care for him, and da-da-da, can he do this, can he do that? And they are the tensions that are there between male and female, parents and whatever. And in a sense, I hope I'm a half decent product of a bit of both. But that sense that you do, and I appreciated my mother wanted to be close into me and care for me. And I also appreciated my father saying, come on, get up. We'll go another bit. So I honor them as much as all of you this day, and I'm very happy that this has given me an opportunity that I wouldn't have otherwise to do that. You are valued members of the Disability Federation of Ireland. I want to say that to you. And Fran, I mentioned the sterling service you've given as chair of DFI over the past number of years, and your capacity to strongly advocate for the needs of your organization. You guys as an organization, you have soul, you're practical, you know your core issues, you're focused on getting them solved, and you have a strong involvement of your membership. I would be happy if I could as well say that about a lot of other organizations. I know you'll think, oh, we could do this better and that, but I really am saying that sincerely today. The best of luck to you all, and I suspect I won't be invited to the 60th for obvious reasons. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John, for that heartfelt reflection back on our lives. And John, before you sit down, we would like to just give you a small token of our appreciation. Thank you. Thank you, John. And now I will ask Fran to give you details of where we're at in relation to our new strategic plan.
Thanks, Macrina. Not for the first time, I've very much regretted following John Dolan. He's always a tough act to follow, and I'll have to remember in future to make sure that he speaks after me and not the other way around. I know it's been a long day, and I appreciate that we're all tired, so I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I do think it's important to give you some flavour of where we are in terms of the development of our new strategic plan. So just very quickly, if I may, folks. So every member was sent a members' needs questionnaire last autumn. Now, I know only about half the members returned them, so we have spare copies here today. If you didn't send back your members' needs questionnaire, I would very much implore you to do so. So you can get a copy of one from the information stand. It's invaluable in us helping you. With that information, we can do a much better job of supporting you. So please do grab one of those questionnaires, fill it in, and send it back to us. Based on that data, we then selected a representative sample of members for our survey based on age, level of disability, income, and gender and migrant status. Because quite frankly, there's a significant number now of our members who have been born in other countries, and it's an important cohort of our organisation. Maybe no surprise to you that these were the biggest issues that were identified in the survey, and some of them are obviously things that we've talked about and we've, in some cases, have been providing for years. Obviously, aids and appliances is a big one, but also free medical care. And we touched earlier about the long-term illness card, and I mentioned about the fact that a significant percentage, about 40% of our members, don't have medical cards. So that's where that whole issue of free medical care is coming up in terms of our members identifying their greatest needs. And then staying driving. It's one thing to have a disability in the city, but if you're in the country and you have a disability, then really you are very, very isolated, and there's all sorts of repercussions coming out of that. I won't go through the entire list. You can see it there. There's a summary of the survey results outside on the information desk, and you can get a copy of it then. But this just gives you a flavour of the issues people have flagged to us. And I suppose there's some repetition in some of these questions, but when you ask a question a different way, you get a slightly different flavour. And so we ask people what are the challenges and issues they have, and mobility, of course, is an important issue for most of our members, and that ties into the aids and appliances. But isolation and loneliness came up as number 2. So isn't that significant? And of course, coming out of post-COVID, that's maybe more significant than it would have been a few years ago. And it ties in with issues like transport and mobility, because of course, the more isolated people are physically, the more isolated and lonely they become psychologically. And again, accessibility, old age, pain, financial costs. These are all the challenges that people are concerned about and want and would hope that the organisation might be able to help them with. And I suppose tied into that, anxieties, again, similar issues, mobility, their future health, other health issues, because polio survivors are no different than any other member of the community. They have other conditions as well. And again, loneliness, not going out, pops up again. The things that people thought we were currently doing that we should keep doing and that were really important to them, again, no surprise, aids and appliances, the sort of support that we give people in accessing social welfare and other entitlements. And Macrina mentioned earlier about around 240 or 50 members contacted us for help with things like social welfare and other entitlements last year. And that ties in with advice and information from the office. And of course, the heating grant, which of course, with the current cost of living crisis, has become really important lifeline for many members. Again, I won't go through all of them, but you're familiar with a lot of these services. Another question we ask people, does your medical provider, your GP, understand polio? And you can see there that a significant percentage of our members felt that their GPs didn't. And Pat McGillian eloquently touched on that earlier today. And that's despite the fact that we engaged in quite an extensive communication campaign with GPs around the country in the last 5 years, and literally sent thousands of leaflets to GP practices the length and breadth of the country. But despite that, there's still a significant problem there. As you know, we've appointed a new advocacy officer. Obviously, we're interested to know what sort of issues we should be taking up with the government and with statutory agencies. And these were the sort of things that people were asking us to address. Financial supports covered a wide range of different things, including improved grants from the government for heating, amongst other things, but also things like housing adaptation grants and grants for stairlifts and so forth. Medical card issue came up again. Huge issue for those members who haven't got a medical card. And in most cases, the people are a fraction above the minimum or the maximum requirement, income requirement for a medical card. So we've got members who are hundreds of euro or €1,000 over the limit and therefore qualify for nothing in terms of the medical card. And of course, that's just crazy. And again, you see things like social welfare entitlements cropping up there, as well as education on polio. And again, that's about the fact that many medical and social care providers have no understanding of polio. So a lot of it is repetition, to be honest, but it's the same issues, and it shows that they're the burning issues that our members are concerned about. One question we asked was, is there any service or support that we don't offer that you think we should prioritise? And we call it home visits because there's a bit of, obviously, an overlap between things like home help, PAs, but also just that issue about isolation and loneliness. And so some people are just saying, if it's somebody to call on and have a chat with, would be a huge service to me. And I suppose tied into that, community support workers again. So, you know, there's that thing about people feeling isolated, feeling lonely, feeling disconnected, and the whole COVID backdrop to that as well. And I think those first three issues there, they're all interrelated really, where people really feel they could do with some support, you know, personal support at home. Now, whether the organisation can help with that's another matter, because obviously we're a small organisation with limited resources. But at least we now know that that's a really important issue for our members, and we will certainly see what we can try and do. And if it's not us that can do it, maybe it is a case that there could be more done by other organisations or by the state. And then I suppose related to that was the one thing that members would like us to see the organisation prioritise over the next few years, and lobby government for better service supports and a greater degree of recognition of polio and the issues affecting polio survivors was number one by a mile. By there was no contest at all. That was by far the biggest thing that people wanted us to do. So it's timely that we now have an advocacy officer for the first time, and this survey couldn't have been better timed in that respect. And then the home care issue and the home support that came up there, regular phone contact, and I guess if we don't have the resources to actually call in people's houses, then the next best thing is maybe to have a chat with people. And that has implications for our telephone support service. And I see Mick Keegan there. And that's something we'll obviously be talking about in terms of that service in the future. Mental health support. Interesting one. Again, coming out of the whole loneliness and isolation that people are experiencing. And of course, the backdrop of COVID as well. So there are sort of a quick run through of the issues that people flagged to us in the strategic plan. It's a big shopping list. It's a challenge for the organisation, and I'm not going to pretend that we could necessarily do everything that people are asking us to do. But we will go away and we'll see what we can do. And if we can't do it, we'll see if there are others who are better equipped to do some of these things. In the meantime, the next steps is we'll bring together a small group of people to tease out some of these issues. Because invariably with these questionnaires, you often come away with, well, what do they mean by this and what do they mean by that? And what sort of insights can we try and gather from it? So we will bring together a group of maybe 12, 15 people. We did it actually last autumn, and there's one or two people here who attended that group. I know Pat Ryan was at it, and it was in Portlaoise. This time it might be in Dublin, and we might do that in July. So that'll tease out some of the issues. We'll also ask those of you who are in social support groups to maybe look at one or two of these questions as well and get some thoughts and feedback from you. And then the steering group that's overseeing this exercise will gather all that data, obviously debate and discuss it. The staff will give their thoughts and views as to what they think we could realistically do given the resources we have. And finally, it'll be up to the board to decide what we prioritise. And that's a difficult job. I'll just say to you, in the last board, when it was dealing with the development of our last strategic plan, it spent months agonising over what to do. Because the problem was there was so much people wanted and so little that we could really do. And so that was a really, really difficult question. And some of the people who were on the board at the time, and some of them were mentioned by John and some of them were mentioned by other people here today, were in tears about that because they knew they couldn't do everything that the members wanted them to do. So that's a sobering experience, and I wouldn't like to underestimate or understate the challenge it is for the board in really deciding what we can't do as opposed to what we will do. That is quite a struggle. But the board, I'm sure, will do its very, very best to make the best decisions it can in the context of its members' needs. And then hopefully at the end of the year, or before the end of the year, we'll have a strategic plan that we'll be able to present to all the members. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Is that a reflection at the end of the day, or because the presentation was absolutely crystal clear and so well delivered that there's nothing to be said?
Thank you, Fran, for that update, and we'll keep you posted, particularly through the magazine and the website as the year progresses. Now, there's just one other thing is our sweeps. I want to announce the Survivor Sweepstakes winners announcement. There was no winner for the £1,000 top prize. However, there were 3 winners for the €50 prize, and they are Ita Murphy, Nigel Warburton, and Sean Dunlan. And congratulations to the CFO. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking the staff in the hotel, the speakers here today, for all that they have contributed to us. And last but by no means least, I want to say a big thank you to Fran, who appropriately, don't disappear again, Fran, that's a bad habit you're getting. I would particularly like to say that the board, and on behalf of yourselves, to thank Fran and his absolutely magnificent staff for their dedication and the commitment that they give to us day in, day out. And we owe them a huge debt of gratitude, and we're most appreciative of it. Thank you. So now I wish you all a safe journey home, and business never ends. So the board now have to adjourn for a board meeting, and we'll get cracking on things.
We might pull a few more raffle tickets at the end if we can.
Yeah. Anne. Sir, you come up here, Anne.
Yeah.
Usually you ask if there's any questions at the end. So first of all, I always like to give a thank you to the Survivor team. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say a very sincere thank you to the Survivor team, Jackie Minnick and all the others involved. Unfortunately, she's not here today. The survivor is one of the most important things I think that we do. So I'd like to say thank you very much for that. There's one other thing that I would like to raise. For me personally, we have 6 part-time staff and 1 full-time, I understand. Would it be an idea, since I don't know these people anymore, if they would come up and just each person take 1 minute to say, I am, and this is what I do. It would be lovely to do that. Maybe you'll think about it for next year.
Yes, certainly we will indeed. Thank you, Anne. Yes.